address the issue about films reflecting social attitudes rather than creating social attitudes. A few comments about the films. The Grapes of Wrath had a scene where the Okies, after disastrous encounters with one horrific opposition after another, come to a camp that's run by the government. And it's one of the few moments of encouragement and relief in the entire film, as it was in the novel. Steinbeck was a powerful left-of-center advocate of the New Deal. And that scene was reflective of the good that government can do when people are deeply distressed. All the King's Men, you saw Roderick Crawford, who won the Academy Award for that film, giving that wonderful speech. But of course, he's Willie Stark or Huey Long, and he ultimately gets corrupted by power and becomes dangerously fascistic and ultimately is assassinated. JFK, that was a wonderful speech by Kevin Costner, but what does he say? What he's saying is Oliver North's crazy concoction of the conspiracy theory, and that's what that speech is all about. The truth must be told, and what is Oliver North saying is the truth. That everybody conspired to kill JFK. Everybody, the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Council, the Pentagon, the US Marine Corps. This is the danger of cinema. Cinema is the most seductive of all media. And one has to be extremely careful when you go into a movie theater and those lights darken and a big, huge screen begins to proliferate larger-than-life images and deeply eloquent speeches. You could often be seduced into believing in images that are at times inappropriate. High Noon. What are we talking about really in this whole discussion? What are we really talking about when we talk about government and its depiction in film and our sense of government in real life? We are talking essentially about the basic conflict between individualism as opposed to collectivism. That is what we are currently obsessed with in our country and certainly in our political culture. Individualism as opposed to collectivism. Whether you're a conservative who believes that people are innately good as long as external constraints are not imposed upon their natural tendency toward goodness. The liberal progressive is wary of the direction that individualism might take. We're worried about rampant and unconstrained greed, which may be indulged in at the expense of the collective. My sense is that the American people have bought into a cult of individualism, which is inescapable in our culture, and which ultimately affects our political psychology. Consider a 2009 Gallup poll. 57% of the people polled believe that government is trying to do too many things that should be left in the hands of private individuals and business. 45% that there's too much government regulation of business. Only 27% feel that the government regulation is about right, and only 24% believed that government is doing too little. This is pretty shocking, coming 1 year after the economic collapse, nearly of our entire global economy. I don't know how many people saw Inside Job or the HBO production of Too Big to Fail. But we certainly know about Bernard Madoff. And we certainly know that while he was bilking people out of $64 billion, the SEC was on vacation somewhere. My fascination with this subject is to dig into the very foundations of our political beliefs, who we are as Americans. And my contention is that skepticism about government has always been a key component of the American political culture. It's there embedded in our founding fathers and our founding documents. Government is a necessary evil. It's there to protect people and property, facilitate trade and international commerce, and to make sure that the system is running reasonably well. I'll offer another assertion, that I'm sure will be fully explored in the oncoming presentations in this wonderful course. And that is the very foundation of American individualism is biblical in origin. Our country was founded by Puritans who came out of the Reformation. And what was the Protestant Reformation all about? To me, it is the stripping away of anything that interferes, anything that intrudes upon the individual's direct encounter with God. Individualism taken to its ultimate extreme. There is nothing that transcends the individual conscience and the individual experience of encountering the divine. Now, this is a powerful belief which is often absorbed almost by osmosis into our culture. In the few minutes that have been allotted to us, let me offer a basic foundation of individualism as we have absorbed it as Americans. My field is literature, so let me offer a few examples of where our basic belief in individualism comes from. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a few quotes. Do not go where the path may lead. Go where there is no path and leave a trail. Every actual state is corrupt. Good men must not obey laws too well. In the end, nothing is sacred except the integrity of your own mind. Ralph Waldo Emerson. His best friend was Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, civil disobedience. Nothing and nobody is going to command my conscience. Powerful influence of Thoreau on Mahatma Gandhi, and particularly Martin Luther King. Walt Whitman, the greatest of all poets out of our tradition, the original hippie, the original flower child, a man who simply radiates joy in the uniqueness of his own individual personality, and as a matter of fact, radiates from his individual center an embracement of the entire universe. It all starts with him. Washington Irving, Ichabod Crane, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the original oddball, the weirdo, the nerd, the klutz, the awkward doofus, but he's become a central character in our culture. James Fenimore Cooper. What is it to be an American? It's to be essentially a pioneer. It's to go into that wilderness, totally unencumbered with anything other than your own basic fundamental skills of survival, to make a home on an individual basis in the darkness of a wilderness. Natty Bumppo, Hawkeye, and the Last of the Mohicans. That's what it is to be an American, whether it's penetrating the wilderness or starting a business. You're entering into dangerous and challenging territory, and you're on your own. You're on your own. Mark Twain, Huck Finn. Consider the character of Huck Finn, one of the greatest creations in our American tradition. Here is a young boy who's told by every external circumstance in his society and in his church that to help a black slave run away from his master toward freedom is tantamount to committing mortal sin, for which you will be punished eternally in hell. Huck Finn decides on damnation rather than betrayal of his friend. This is American individualism taken to its extreme. Emily Dickinson, The soul selects its own society, then shuts the door on her divine majority. Obtrude no more. Melville, the character of Ahab, Captain Ahab, lunging for vengeance after a dumb brute beast, a whale. And Starbuck, his first mate, looks at him at one point and says, "You are taking vengeance on a dumb beast who wounded you at a blind instinct. This is blasphemy." Ahab's response, "Don't talk to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the very sun if it insulted me." Whoa. This is American individualism. That can't go any further. This is metaphysical individualism. Ernest Hemingway, Nick Adams, totally alone in the Michigan wilderness, fishing in the big two-hearted river, setting up a campfire, cooking his simple food, trying desperately to come to terms with the severe trauma suffered in combat during World War I. We Americans adore the rebel. John Garfield, the leading Jewish actor of the 30s and 40s, right out of Hell's Kitchen, Julius Garfinkel, Marlon Brando in The Wild One, James Dean, even today, James Franco, the loner, the iconoclast, the defiant one, the outsider, the gangster. We worship the gangster. The rebel, the wanderer. And what do you see in Hollywood films depicting the individual in the context of environment? You see the individual on the open road as an easy rider, or in the wilderness, or passing through a small town, or in the prairie, or looking up at a big, huge American sky. Will Kane in High Noon. This is the triumph of the individual over the collective. The collective fails Will Kane, the marshal. The collective fails him, and he has to triumph totally on his own, with all the odds against him. Shane, riding off into the sunset, wounded, having vanquished all the bad guys, but totally incapable of connecting on a sustained basis to the human context. Marlon Brando in The Wild One, 1951. "What are you rebelling against?" somebody asks him. "What do you got?" Jimmy Dean, Jim Stark, Rebel Without a Cause, Jet Ring, Giant, Cal Trask in East of Eden. Misunderstood, desperately lonely, but too proud to reach out for the human connection. Jack Nicholson, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The sociopath as saint. These American cultic images are absorbed unconsciously as well as consciously. It affects our behavior. It seeps into our opinions. It deeply influences our political and social attitudes. And it certainly affects our voting for political candidates who determine the kind of government that will shape each and every one of our lives. Thank you.